Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Vin Cipolla.
Okay. Thank you. Let's do this. All right, I have a lot of notes. I'm going to try to be quick. First, before I go any further, I want to thank the MAS staff working so hard on this event. Could I hear it for them? It's really hard work. I can't name all of them, but Alex on social media, and Megan on communications, and Joanna, and Stacy, and Michael, of course, Margaret and Mary, everyone, thank you so much. Also, tonight at 5 o'clock, we will have a brilliant performance of Durant's dance, and please don't miss it. Michelle is absolutely amazing. Her company is extraordinary, and they're going to rock the stage, literally, since they're tap dancers, tonight at 5 o'clock. So Evangeline Blashfield, I hope, would be really impressed with these 2 days, right? So it was in 1893 that she founded the Municipal Art Society in her studio on West 57th Street to make the city more beautiful. So Evangeline, this is to you. This is where we have come. This morning we had such a brilliant discussion, so fabulously moderated by Darren Walker, Janet, Carol Coletta, and others. Really quite a morning, quite a yesterday, and it will be quite an afternoon. So I hope you will all stay with us. If it's anything like yesterday, lunch is going to be jammed. There will be no seats. I stood up when I was eating my sandwich, and this afternoon will be just great. MAS's Global Practitioners Network is our network where we are connecting people working locally to improve the livability and resilience of their cities. And when we talk about resilience, we don't just talk about environmental resilience, but we talk about economic and social resilience. When we mentioned the Ebola crisis yesterday morning from this stage, and then of course at 3:20 in the afternoon, we got news of the first Ebola victim here in New York. There was, obviously, that was a very resonant discussion about the fabric of our resilience in New York. We began building this network with support from the Rockefeller and McConnell Foundations, Canada's Cities for People, as well as various other partners like the World Bank and Nature of Cities. We hosted a very popular session at UN Habitat's World Urban Forum in Medellin, Colombia, and have been building collaborative relationships with civil society partners in other cities as well. All this is happening because we believe we have an opportunity like never before for cities to collaborate and learn from one another. We believe that cities are the answer to many of our challenges globally. Some have argued that cities are the greatest invention of our species. Cities incubate innovation and foster opportunity. Urban economies drive national ones. Cities create magnificent culture, beauty, and opportunities for collective expression. But a lot of what goes on in a city is not under its control. States and federal governments impose rules from afar. Global trends affect cities. Should cities have more power, more authority to control their own destinies? Joining MAS Board Chair Eugenie Birch in this session are some of the leading thinkers on city autonomy and governance. To start off, would you welcome back Dr. Eugenie Birch and her very esteemed panel of urban leaders to answer, why do cities matter to the world?
Rushing on the stage because we have a lot to say here. And thank you very much for that kind introduction. And we're sorry you have to eat standing up, Vin. At any rate, we have a wonderful, wonderful panel here of experts from around the world. And our first expert is Teng Chye, who is the executive director and founder of the Center for Livable Cities in Singapore, that great experiment and example of livability, resilience, density, and all sorts of good things. So please, in Singapore, you talk a lot about governance, not government, but governance. Can you tell us what you've learned in creating the Center for Livable Cities? what's important to move a city forward? Elected leadership, engaged civil society, business involvement?
Thank you, Eugenie. I'm from the Center for Livable Cities, Singapore, and we were founded really by the government of Singapore 6 years ago. And the reason why the center was set up was we had the mission to distill, to create, and share knowledge on livable and sustainable cities. Now, Singapore, until half century ago, 40 to 50 years ago, was really a basket case of urbanization gone wrong. Whatever urban ill you can think of, overcrowding, disease, poverty, traffic congestion, you name them, lack of greenery, lack of water, polluted rivers, you name them, we had them. And yet we were barely 2 million people. We were less than 2 million people living on a little island, about 700 square kilometers, a little bit less at that time because we reclaimed it a little bit. That's less than half the size of New York and the boroughs. But over the last 50 years, we have now tripled our population. So the density has actually tripled to now 5.5 million. Essentially still the same island. We reclaimed a little bit, but not very much. And yet we are now ranked one of the more livable cities in the world. So if you look at that slide, this is a high density city, but yet amidst that density, we have greenery, we have parks, and increasingly we have blue. So the issue then is, for cities which are high density, how do you be livable and sustainable? That's the challenge we face and we overcome, and that's a continuing challenge for us as we look out over the next 40 to 50 years. And that's why we thought it was important for us to distill some principles from what we did, right? I mean, your word experiment is exactly right. We were an experiment, although it was kind of an existential experiment for us, because if we had failed, it would have been the end of Singapore, given that we are a city-state. And so it was an experiment that worked, but I think we are now trying to figure out what is it that made the experiment work and what are the principles that can help us look into the future. And we distill the principles into what we call a Center for Livable Cities framework, where we think that the outcomes of quality of life, of a sustainable environment, of a competitive economy, I think these are what we call the livable outcomes that all cities want to achieve. But balancing these outcomes and trying to resolve the trade-offs and the conflicts and the tensions so that you achieve a balanced development, not growth at the expense of the environment or growth that is not inclusive. How do we do that? I think from the case studies that we looked at Singapore, we did case studies, we call them urban system studies. We distilled two key things that we thought are responsible for sustaining livability outcomes over the long term. And one is planning. We call it integrated planning and development. So it's it's not just about planning, but it's really about an integrated approach to planning and actually executing the plans. So it's really the technical side, if you like, the professionals and the execution of the plans. But underpinning all of that, the most important thing that we found is actually governance. And I say governance rather than government, because it's not just about government, but it's really about a good government, a good leadership, that's important, but it's also about a government that works well with the private sector and with the community, so that it is a kind of a whole of society, or what we call the 3P, public, private, people approach to achieving the goals of society.
So this is a fantastic example of a place that, as you said, has moved in just a generation, really, from a difficult situation to a worldwide model. Governance that's at the base. Unusual because you're a nation state.
Yes.
And many of our cities are not ruled by nation states, but ruled by mayors. But they have relationships, of course, with their regional governments and with their federal governments and with civil society, as you've mentioned. So we have some experts here who are going to talk to us from the point of view of theory, in the case of Benjamin Barber, who's written an extremely, no, not theory, okay.
Practice.
But you've taken practice and turned it to theory, I think. That's what you're supposed to do as an academic, at any rate. And written a very, very fine book about mayors. And we have a former city planning director, Harriet Tegoning, who also has worked at the state and regional level, both in the public and private sectors, and is now at HUD, working on economic resilience, taking over that very, very important area. And then we have, we think, we're trying to verify this, the world's longest standing mayor in the room with us, Joe Riley. We know he is the United States' longest standing mayor, 10 terms, if you can believe that. And we think worldwide, there's no other city mayor who's been at it for this amount of time. So let's hear from you, Benjamin, about practice, not theory.
Well, let me start by politicizing our subject. And by the way, I think we all feel like we're doing speed dating. Don't you feel that way? In and out, in and out. And so we'll have to be very fast. We hope you like us and will date us later after we leave the stage. But let me start with a political point. We live in a world in which both democracy is in crisis and governance and government is in crisis. The nation states that for 400 years have been the central governing institutions are increasingly dysfunctional. We see our own national Congress paralyzed by ideology. In many other countries, you see similar forms of national paralysis. At the international level, the global problems we face of immigration and climate and terrorism are not being sufficiently dealt with, in many cases, not at all. So my question as, yes, a political theorist first was, what's the alternative? And my suggestion is we stop thinking about and talking about dysfunctional nation states. Sorry for HUD, there are some very good parts of it that still work, and start thinking about cities. Stop talking about presidents and start talking about mayors. Stop talking about the passive television watching citizens who vote once in a while in national elections and talk about the engaged citizens who see themselves as neighbors and members of a city. When we change the subject to cities, it turns out that in fact cities are already engaged in a level of democratic trust higher than any other political institution, not just in the United States, but around the world, and that cities are solving pragmatically and realistically the problems that nation states are having such terrible problems solving. My suggestion is then that we need to look to mayors, to cities, to city councilors, and to the citizens of cities, not just to solve problems, but actually take on the role of governing the world. My book is called If Mayors Ruled the World. The subtitle used to be They Already Do, because in many ways they are already the only ones engaged in problem solving, not just city by city, but through massive intercity associations like the C40, ICLE. Quick quiz, who's heard of the UCLG? Great, there are about 4 of you out of a couple of hundred here. It's the most important institution in the world nobody's ever heard of. United Cities and Local Governments. It's a kind of global assembly of cities, but it's not political. It's not legislative. My bottom line suggestion is take the hardworking mayors of the world's cities, north and south, large and small, take the many inner city associations that are already out there and functioning, and put them together, and here's why I talk about practice, put them together in a global parliament of mayors, in which mayors begin to take up all of those issues of climate, terrorism, police authority, trade, that we're doing so badly with at the nation state and the UN level, and work together to fashion solutions in those communities where over half of the world's population live. By the way, it's 75 to 80% in the developed world live in cities, where 80% of the global GDP is produced, and where also 80% of global emissions, carbon emissions, are produced. Cities can do it, they have the capacity to do it, and when they work together, they can do it even better. And in a global parliament of mayors, for which we had a organizational meeting last September, just a month ago in Amsterdam, and next year on October 23rd and 24th in London and Bristol, which will be the green capital of Europe, 2 months before the meeting, the UN Climate Summit in Paris, there will be a meeting of, we hope, 120 to 150 mayors. Mayor Riley, I hope you'll be there. I hope mayors from around the world. We have mayors north and south coming. We are actually moving, and here's the practice. It started as a chapter in the book, but in fact, we now have a program to institute a global parliament of mayors that will confront real power and real politics at the global level and start to do what nation states are not doing, and on the way, we hope, kindle a new enthusiasm and belief in democracy among cynical citizens who no longer believe in it.
Well, terrific. That was very powerful. And we should mention, we can move further from that. We need to push for the urban SDG, as we've talked about earlier, the Sustainable Development Goal that currently says make cities inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable, and has 7 targets. And in 2016, after the Climate Change Conference, there's the Habitat 3. And here's our chance to move from mayors sitting on the side and moving them into the center. But let's get back to the United States. Mayor Riley, you've just heard the theory. You've just heard the theory from Professor Barber, activist Professor Barber. Tell us, is he right or wrong?
Well, we don't have armies. Cities don't have armies, which makes us somewhat at a disadvantage, I guess, in an international standpoint. But I think the point that the professor has made in his book is that mayors have shown in cities that they get things done, and that's because we're focused on the bottom line. We don't get anywhere by talking or by arguing. I mean, our citizens hold us accountable to make our city safe, to make it economically successful, to make it just to have a beautiful and vibrant public realm, and that is unusual, I guess, a good bit in the political world that we have now. And I've been mayor for a long time, which I love, and it's the best job in the world, but the citizens re-elect me, and they only are going to re-elect a mayor if they feel that he or she is working hard to get things done. And I think the cities have great lessons to share with the rest of the world. Whether we could form a global ruling alliance, I don't know, but we certainly have a lot to share, and the importance of cities to our country and to the world increases every day. I mean, we're increasingly more urban in America, and creative cities, and cities that have the power to stir the men and women's souls in their community, and cities that become great incubators of ideas and economic development, and cities that have public realm that inspire the citizens. You know, the thing about a city is that the public realm that is created is owned by everyone. So a society is so much better when more of the things we value are things we own collectively rather than what we own privately. A city builds a beautiful, stunning, large urban park or small little square, and you give to every citizen a special gift. They internalize it differently, but it does stir their souls. It does lift their spirits. It does make them creative, and that's why, among many other reasons, cities are increasingly important to the world and to our country.
So you've been there, done that. What's your proudest moment in the public realm for Charleston? I know there are a lot of them, so it's going to be hard for him to choose.
Well, creating beautiful parks, I guess, in the public realm. I feel guilty that I'm actually paid to do that. It's so joyful. I mean, I love working in the development of parks, and you know, and you go to the parks, and people, and the thing about the center city is we serve the metropolitan area, as we should. I feel a duty. I'm only elected by the citizens of my city, but I know that cities are important to the region. And I go to a park, and someone will come up to me and they'll say, Mayor Riley, I'm from so-and-so, which is a suburban town or community, and we love your park. And I say, thank you so much. This is your park. It belongs to the region. It belongs to everyone. I'm building the public realm, and then creating institutions. My passion right now is working to create the International African American Museum. 40% of all enslaved Africans that came to North America came to Charleston. And we as Americans know so little about this part of American history, African American history, and cities must be a just city, and I feel it's our duty in Charleston to create a museum. We've got this beautiful site on the harbor where the original wharf was, where most of the enslaved Africans came. As Lonnie Bunch, head of the National African American Museum in Washington, said, there are few sacred places of African American history in this hemisphere, and ours is one of them. So another thing cities you do is build valuable institutions, museums or cultural institutions that also stir people's souls, whether they live there or visit.
What a powerful reminder of the layering of physical space and the power of preservation in its broadest sense. Harriet, you've been there at all levels. Do you buy this, that the mayor's rule? I mean, where's the role of the state? You were with Governor Glendening. Where's the role of the nation? You're now with HUD, and you were in the shoes of someone who had to deal in the city level. So give us some perspective here on what we just heard from
I can give you a
speakers.
definitive answer. It is all about cities. That is the definitive answer. Everything else is really should be working in support of cities, and certainly my favorite job so far. I'm only 7 months into HUD, but was in the District of Columbia, which is sort of a city-state because the district doesn't have an Albany. It doesn't really have a Sacramento, and so a lot of things can get done if the city leaders can get together and decide to do something. But I also want to give Mayor Riley credit for an idea that I think Ben has also been talking about. He started an amazing institution, the Mayor's Institute on City Design, and the notion behind it was the mayors are the chief designers of their city, and that planning and design are incredibly important tools in the hands of an informed mayor. And I think that was such a gift to the world to have started that, and so many mayors have gone through that and had a literal epiphany about what their role should be. So here's to you for starting that.
That's a very good point, Harriet, because many people who run for mayor do not come from the design professions, don't have a sense of the physicality of cities. So to be able to educate and get them to spend a few days thinking about this.
But I do have to agree or disagree with Mayor Riley. We do have armies. We have legions of people in the city who are dying to help roll up their sleeves and solve the problems of the city, and that is increasingly the case every day. And I think cities need to figure out ways to do less of their job. A lot of cities think of themselves as preventing bad things from happening. That's what regulation is about, and figuring out more ways to let good things happen and to really harness the energy. You know, there's such a do-it-yourself movement, even in the shape and the form of cities. A group called Better Blocks around Dallas. You've got Mike Lydon here with his tactical urbanism. Jeanette Sadiq-Khan did an amazing job using magic words like temporary and pilot. You know, those are magic words.
Those are sensitive here.
Those are magic words, and I think cities are amazing laboratories of innovation, and it applies in business. But I think the most important place to apply it is to the actual problems of the city.
But Harriet, what's the enabling environment? I mean, you're in the federal government now. What's your role?
So the federal government used to fund everything. We used to pay for everything, and we don't have the money to do that anymore. So we're trying to learn how to be more catalytic, how to be more of a partner and less the sole source of the funding, and to really figure out how to be collaborative. Last month, HUD launched a $1 billion national disaster resilience competition, you know, hoping to give a similar epiphany to states and localities to look at some of the projects like the Rebuild by Design projects. Why would we ever build a piece of infrastructure again in America that doesn't help make a place, that isn't place-making? Right. Why a berm or a levee if a waterfront park would serve the same purpose? So that's what we're hoping to really do, working in partnership with cities and states.
Benjamin.
A quick point on funding. Cities provide about 80% of global GDP. They provide the preponderance of tax funding, and then it's doled back out by state and national governments as if it's a gift. And all we need to do is demand a larger proportion to pay for the work of cities that mayors are doing, so they don't have the unfunded mandates, which now give them the responsibilities and not the resources.
Mayor Riley, and then I'm coming back to Teng Chye, because I think he has something to say.
That's so important, because I think the urban policy a while ago was cities were greatly distressed and had to get some money. That what we really need to see it, as the professor said, is nationally investing in national resources in these institutions that are incredibly important to our national economic and social success. So the national government has to begin reinvesting in affordable housing in cities. It's so important. We discussed that earlier today. The just city, you've got to have affordable housing. Affordable housing, it doesn't, the numbers by themselves don't work. It needs incentives, and also the infrastructure of our nation's cities are essential to the success of our country. The national government needs to get back in the business of directly funding these kind of resources in cities, because we're so important to our nation.
So how do we get these federal officials to really think cities? Let me tell you what happened when we talked to the State Department about the urban SDG. The State Department created 11 subcommittees of federal agencies to look at all of the sustainable development goals that will be proposed in the next year. And these 11 subcommittees came and met and discussed with them and advised the federal government on what they should do. And we were meeting with them, and they said, oh, where did you put cities? Did you have a special subcommittee on cities? Guess what the answer was? No. We said, oh, that's interesting. Where did you put it? They said, oh, well, we put it in environment with oceans. So we've got a long way to go here.
Well, the oceans will soon be in the cities with the sea rise, so maybe that's...
Exactly. We hope we've raised their consciousness that maybe mayors should rule, maybe cities where the action is. But Teng Chye, tell us, in Singapore, you have a national government that understands this.
Well, I think one of the things that we have done as a center is to create a platform for cities to share best practices and knowledge. We call it the World City Summit. We've been doing it since 2008. I think about 200 cities altogether have participated from all over the world. And one of the things we do is to create an award for kind of the best city that has shown transformation to be livable and sustainable. And in 2012, the winner was New York City. And next year, in fact, we're going to have the World City Summit Mayors Forum in New York City in June.
Bravo.
And one of the things in response to your comment on sustainable development goals, that the 130 mayors and other city leaders who gathered in Singapore in June this year at the Mayors Forum, they collectively signed a declaration to support a sustainable development goal to be presented to the United Nations, and I think it has been presented, to support a sustainable development goal on cities. And I think that's where, not quite a global parliament, but I think it's really a real-life assembly of mayors from all over the world.
So what do you say to the government official, the federal, national government official, who says, this doesn't matter to me. I'm in charge of wars. I'm in charge of other things. I'm not in charge of cities. What's your answer? This is our last question because we're told to wrap up here.
I think at the end of the day, it's governance, not government or government system. So irrespective of what kind of government system that you exist in, whether it's American or European or Chinese or Singaporean city-state, I think at the end of the day, what matters, what counts is governance. Yeah.
Okay, Benjamin, last word.
There are so many things that you can do. You deal with undocumented workers. De Blasio has a program of urban visas. You can deal with terrorism. New York has sent its intel squad to other cities, not to Washington, to do intelligence. That's the real key. Cities are poised to do it. They are doing it. And when they do it together, I guarantee you, you will restore both democracy and governance.
You're threatening national government.
That's their problem. I want to solve problems.
Harriet, you're there.
My new boss is a former mayor of San Antonio, and he calls HUD the Department of Opportunity, and cities are the front line of where income inequality is really being addressed. with universal pre-kindergarten, with rising, living wages with cities taking action, with real initiatives to reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
So the role is to push national government to act as it should.
Well, let's be clear. It's going to have to be a partnership.
Of course. Mayor Riley, last word.
Our role is to be a place of excellence and justice, and by doing that, we enhance our states, we enhance our nation to be examples of getting things done, improving the lives of our citizens, and knowing we have the power, if we do it well, to stir our citizens' souls.
Use our power wisely and justly. Thank you. Very good.